He knocked on the door of 13 Miller's Court, which was locked from the inside. No answer. And round the corner, there was a four window panes, like a sash window, as we call in the UK. And one of those window panes was broken and stuffed with an old coat. So Thomas Blade put his hand in and pulled that and the curtain back to reveal the worst atrocity ever committed.
The Codega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his Codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with the Codega and sharing one of yours. You know, there's something about unsolved mysteries that just gets under your skin, especially when it's about a killer who just vanished without a trace. Now, have you ever heard of the servant girl annihilator? I know it's not as famous as Jack the Ripper, but back in the 1880s in Austin, Texas, this unknown figure was terrorizing the city. 8 people brutally murdered, most of them African-American servant women, all killed while they slept. The attacks were so calculated, so brutal, that even back then, people started whispering that maybe this was the work of a deranged mind, something more than just random violence. Well, what's wild is that the murders stop as suddenly as they started. Some theorists think the killer might have moved to London and became Jack the Ripper. Others think it's just a creepy coincidence, but whoever the servant girl annihilator was, they got away with it, and it's been over a century without answers. Good evening, curious minds, and welcome to Codega's Codex of Curiosities. I'm Rye, your guide through the shadows of history's most puzzling mysteries. Now, speaking of unsolved mysteries, tonight we're diving headfirst into the infamous case of Jack the Ripper. You know the name, you know the stories. Victorian London's most infamous shadow. But tonight, we're not just talking about the murders. We're going deeper. What do we really know? Who were the suspects? And has modern science finally unmasked the killer? I've got a special guest tonight, Russell Stephen Edwards, who says he's cracked the case. His research is bold, controversial, and maybe even game-changing. So grab your lanterns and steel your nerves. It's time to walk into the unknown. But before we dive in, let's take a moment to remember that these stories aren't just about legends or speculation. They're about real people, real lives that were tragically cut short. Behind every mystery is a victim, someone who deserves to be remembered. Tonight, as we explore these dark chapters of history, let's not forget the humanity that's at the heart of it all. And without further ado, I'm going to bring Russell Edwards to the show. Russell, welcome to Codega's Codex of Curiosities.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very honored to have you on here. You know, I've been following you on Facebook for a little bit now, and I found it really enthralling. And I was like, you know, I would love for you to come on and talk about your book, your findings, your discovery, and also, you know, the Jack the Ripper as well. You know, this, I would say, probably the most infamous of all serial killers, especially ones that haven't been caught. You know, and that's putting it up on the level like BTK and I think there's also the Green River Killer as well. But this is it's one of those ones that kind of sticks with us. And before we go into that, though, why don't you tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about yourself and where they can find you as well?
Sure. My name is Russell Edwards. In 2014, after 14 years of research and DNA analysis, which was 4 years in the labs, we conclusively named the man that was actually behind the real murders, or that were given to the name Jack the Ripper. You can find me on Facebook on Russell Stephen Edwards or the Jack the Ripper Experience. You can go on my website, the jacktherippertour.co.uk. I've got 2 books out now, published, and we've just started our graphic novel, which is 25 issues, and we're on to issue 4 already, which actually gives the full real story, everything, step by step from the origin to the end.
Wow. Yeah, that's you know, it's I think it'd be really fascinating to read about that. And like I said earlier, like we can't forget the humanity of this. When we talk about this, we can't forget that these were real people whose lives were cut short by this man, this deranged serial killer, who had a sick fascination with doing this. But of course, we're always drawn into this darkness, to this curiosity to figure out why, and the motives, if there was any motives, what drove this person to do these sorts of things. Now, why don't we kind of start from the beginning? It's fantastic that, like, oh, and what are the names of your books, actually?
Naming Jack the Ripper and Naming Jack the Ripper: The Definitive Reveal.
Perfect. Okay, so everybody, you can find that on Amazon, I believe you said, right, Russell Edwards?
And you can get it from me on
Oh,
the rippertour.co.uk.
there we go. Yeah, and you give tours of all the locations of Jack the Ripper, correct? Like all these
Yeah,
specific locations, and
it's a bit more than a tour. It definitely
yeah,
is more like an experience where I've been in the area for 35 years, so I know the ins and outs of everywhere around this story. So I get you to feel the story, really, not just go, this is where this was murdered, next one, this is where, and just
yeah,
so there's a few suspects, end of tour. You get to feel the streets, you get to go in the 10 Bells where the victims used to drink. You get to go through old London, bits that nobody sees normally. And it's the fact of taking your time and bringing it, being in that moment is what I do, rather than just let's just talk about the five murders, the suspects.
perfect. Perfect. I think that's fantastic. And I haven't had any tour guides on, except for my like the previous episode I just recorded was with another tour guide out of Iceland, and here we go with another tour guide. I find you tour guides are full of valuable information, and insights on things. And so why don't we start at the beginning then? Let's go to the beginning of where Jack the Ripper started from.
So let me take you back to 19th century Whitechapel. It's in East London. It was an area of mass immigration. So in the 18th century, it was predominantly French. The French Huguenot silk weavers set up this wonderful industry there, making silk garments. And then when they moved out, the Jewish population came in and sort of took over the area. And then in 1881, there was a mass influx of the Jewish population fleeing the Russian pogroms. So by the turn of the 19th century, going into the 20th century, within a 2 mile radius, there was about 135,000 Jewish immigrants living in that just very localized area. And then in the middle of all that, the actual area itself was, I could put vile, virulent, destitute area. Um, we did have the empire. Queen Victoria was on the throne. We ruled the waves. We were the financial hub of the planet. And yet, this little microcosm of East London was where we wouldn't want to go. This is where it was very dastardly, scary. We wouldn't want to go there at night, only for a few things. So back then, there were about between, some say 1,200, some say 1,600 prostitutes in that area. Now, when we use the term prostitutes, it's actually unfortunate is better, because this argument whether victims prostitutes or not, well, they sold their bodies, as did many poor women in those days. If they did, they lived a day-to-day existence. So if they couldn't find a day job, which could have been anything from domestics, selling flowers, selling matches, making matches, matches and matchboxes, then you'd have to sell your body, and the going rate was a groat or 4 pennies. That's what a groat was, which is terrible, really.
Geez, that really is.
Yeah,
It's
that was the going rate. So
very sad.
absolutely. And of course, there was also drugs back then. Was laudanum, like a very potent cough syrup. Opium. The opium dens where Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Oscar Wilde went. Got lots of inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. Oscar Wilde got the picture of Dorian Gray, the inspiration from that from down there. So it's got this real steeped in history on so many different levels from so many different angles. And in the middle of all this, you've got this real, I would say, active decay of a part of London that nobody really cared about. You had this, the 11 Whitechapel murders. and 5 of which were attributed to a myth of Jack that it was a real man, not like Frankenstein or Dracula or the werewolf or the mummy, were fictional monsters. This was even Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This was a real man, and the name Jack the Ripper, which come from a Dear Boss letter, which we'll go on to, that letter said the name Jack the Ripper, and that name just stuck like glue to these murders, and that name has carried this story to the modern day.
Interesting, and I find it strange that you brought up, not strange, but coincidental that you brought up Doctor Jekyll and Mister Hyde, because that is how I've always thought of Jack the Ripper, was Doctor Jekyll and Mister Hyde. You know, you have this day persona and then this night persona of this maniac of sorts.
It's interesting because, again, in the graphic novel more than the book, or both books, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was shown for the very first time in London at the Lyceum Theatre on the 4th of April, 1888. And on the 6th of August, so only 2 days after, going into the 7th, the second Whitechapel murder victim, not the Ripper murder victim, not acknowledged, was Martha Tabram, and she was discovered stabbed 39 times only a few days after the very first showing of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And of
That
course,
was who was that? Was that Annie Chapman? You said
no, Martha Tabram. Sorry, Martha
Martha
Tabram.
Chapman. Okay, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And with when Robert Louis Stevenson wrote that story, which is just an epic story, he did visit the asylums, and he looked at specific splitting, so schizophrenia, which is what our guy suffered with as well. He was schizophrenic. So technically, he was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The only difference was he didn't drink a potion to become another being. He just became another being. So there is a link.
Wow, I find that actually fascinating. Yeah, I've always thought of, like, I don't know why it was never ever stated or anything, but I just always felt that he was a representation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So that was interesting, very interesting. Yeah, and sorry, I messed up because the person that I said, Annie Chapman, that was victim number 2, I believe. But yeah, you were saying Martha Tabram, and
Yeah,
yeah, she was stabbed to death. So
that's
very, very telling. You know, it's this one wasn't and I think you said this one wasn't a tribute to him, but we don't know.
could have been his first. Now,
Okay, okay.
just to clarify for many, many people who do get this mixed up, there were 11 Whitechapel murders. There were 5 Ripper murders. You've got 2 murders, then the 5, then 4. So when I say second murder victim, Whitechapel murder victim, it's Martha Tabram. The second Ripper victim is Annie Chapman. That's how it works. So you've got this, these murders. There was Emma Smith was the first in April, 4th of April, 1888. Then you got Martha on the 7th of August, 1888. And then 3 weeks later, the first Ripper murder, which was Mary Ann or Polly Nichols. Polly was in her 40s, a teeth missing. I would say prone to alcohol or suffered with alcohol addiction. So I'm a psychotherapist, and believe it or not, my specialty is addiction. So she suffered with, she was a heavy drinker. And interestingly enough, she drank in a pub called the Frying Pan the night she was murdered. And she was kicked out of a doss house. So a doss house, or common lodging house, was where like a room with multiple beds that all and sundry could just, say the flotsam and jetsam of the Whitechapel gutter is how I phrase it. And she didn't have a fourpenny, so she got kicked out of her lodging house at about 1:30 in the morning. And poor little Polly, only 5 foot, a bit waif figure. The last acknowledged words from Polly were, "Don't worry, I'll soon get my DOS money, see what a jolly bonnet I've got." She had a new black straw bonnet, and nobody knew where it come from. She was seen about within an hour by a friend called Emily Holland, and she was basically staggeringly drunk. And it wasn't until 3:45 a.m. that she was discovered in Bucks Row by like a workman's yard, Essex Wharf. So it's like a big stable yard type of effect, if you like. And she was discovered by a guy called Charles Cross, who was on his way to work. Now, it's very dark, no lighting really, and he didn't know if she was dead or dead drunk. Another guy walked past, and Robert, Paul, and Charles decided to go and find a policeman. Now, police patrols back then, when you think of the murky night of London, this is what it was like. It's still like that now, though there's no fog. It was PC Neal, and PC Neal shone his bullseye lamp over Polly, realised that she'd been murdered, and her body was taken to the mortuary in Old Montague Street, which is literally around the corner from the whole story. It wasn't until they laid her on the slab that they realised that her throat was cut, so all the connective tissue all the way around was cut, and her bowels were protruding. Now, the way that she was positioned, with her legs spread apart, arms out, the palms up, and her head to the left, the MO was the positioning of the body which he did for his 5 victims. We then get on to only a week later. So just go back up, just reel back a little bit. So we got Martha Tabram, 7th of August, stabbed 39 times. 3 weeks later, we've got Polly Nichols, throat cut, nearly head cut off, bowels protruding. We get to the 8th of September, 1 week later, people aren't even coming to terms with the inquest of Polly Nichols or what to do about this. We then get Annie Chapman. Now, interestingly, today I stood on the murder scene of Annie Chapman today. Now, Dark Annie, she was also known. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I got one of the residents at 29 Hamby Street was going out to the backyard to use the outside toilet or the privy. And as he come down the steps, he saw the body of Annie, again positioned the same way as Polly was. And the atrocities were a lot worse. It escalated a lot more. So not only did he try and cut her head off, he took his knife and from the bottom of his sternum right down to her private parts, cut the entire flap of skin off her and placed it on her right shoulder. He then pulled out her intestines and threw that over her left shoulder. And then he cut out her uterus and he took that with him.
As a trophy, then?
Now that's interesting because I made this discovery from the second book, that I put in the second book, from his family. And what we'll do, we'll go into it and remind me that question, because there's an answer for why he took the body parts. The other thing is, as well, is a uterus. There's in Lincolnton Fields, there's like the Royal College of Surgeons, where they still got all the glass jars of the body parts.
Correct, yeah.
In there, they've got a uterus, and many of them. And I would say it's not small. It's not something you can put in your hand. It's big. So how did he, did he put the side back, cover it, and off he went? A great risk, and also would have been covered in blood and still wasn't caught. So this changed the actual landscape of Whitechapel at that time. The police, the press grabbed onto this story and rode with it. And through press sensationalism, this is why we have the story today. And of course, the Jack the Ripper letter, or the Dear Boss letter, written in Reading, which was received by the Central News Agency on the 27th of September 1888, 2 days before the next 2 murders, was signed by Jack the Ripper. That's the letter that carries the name. And that was written by an enterprising journalist. So, in fact, much to the dismay of everybody that listens to this story, Jack the Ripper and the murderer are 2 completely different entities.
I see. So it was a journalist trying to create sensationalism by doing this.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I know there's a documentary coming out that shortly. There's a few stories on that, but police knew who he was. An enterprising journalist is how they turned him. They never arrested him, interestingly enough. But what a name, what a legend to keep. If I just take you back to about 1811, there were the Ratcliffe Highway murders, 2 families murdered more brutally than Annie and Polly. And yet, if I say the Ratcliffe Highway murders, you go, huh? It's the name that's carried this story, the name of Jack the Ripper. So, again, they didn't really find the murderer. They found somebody, but we don't know if it was him or not. Anyway, we then get to the police giving double shifts in that area. There's a vigilance committee, so all the shopkeepers and builders were also protecting the area. patrolling it. And yet with all that protection, 3 weeks from the night of the morning of Annie Chapman's murder, he went out and murdered 2 inside an hour.
Jeez.
Yeah.
How do you get away with that?
Well, the third murder, that of Elizabeth Stride, she was Swedish. What happened was, so we'll go straight to why. You had to go out murder on the 29th of September and the 8th of November, which is the Michaelmas connection on the date on the shore, which has got me to buy it in the first place. The murder scene of Elizabeth Stride from his front door is 500 yards. It's door to door. Within 5 minutes, he had to go out and murder that night. He went out as quick as he could, opposite the area from where everywhere's getting patrolled, found Elizabeth Stride, committed the murder, but got interrupted. So at 1:45, going into the first hour of the 30th, a Jewish man by the name of Israel Swartz was walking along Berners Street. He sees at the stable yard, Duffield's Yard, a man attacking a woman to try and pull her to the ground and into the stable yard. She screamed 3 times, and as he was trying to drag her in, the man, who he described as 5'5", 5'7", early to mid-30s, dark hair, dark moustache, and foreign, which meant Jewish back then. He's pulling Elizabeth Stride in, and he notices Israel Swartz and shouts the word Lipsky, which is like a derogatory term for a Jewish guy. At that point, a man nearby smoking a pipe ran after Israel Swartz, and Israel Swartz ran for his life. At 1:00, another Jewish man called Louis Deemschutz was bringing his horse and cart in from Commercial Road at the end of Berners Street and wanted to stable his horse in Duffield's Yard. As Louis Deemschutz opens the gate, he sees the body of Elizabeth Stride. He lights a match to get a better look. He can see a huge quantity of blood at the side of the throat, and he goes in the side door to raise the alarm. If Louis Deemschutz had come back the other way, or through the gate, he would have seen the ripper hiding behind the other gate, because there's no way for him to escape. So Elizabeth Stride had her throat cut with no bodily dismemberment or disembowelment. So he had to go and find another victim. And literally, so timing-wise, it's 10 minutes, 30 seconds from murder scene to murder scene on this night.
That's what I was thinking, is like, he got interrupted. He didn't get to get his fill or anything like that. So
Right.
his satisfaction, I guess you would say. And so he's moved on to someone else. Wow.
Exactly. Interestingly enough, the cobbles are still there. You still see the old cobbles. It's really, I think when you walk these streets, you can't escape that feeling of this historic story and the atrocities that happen there. Really weirdly enough, I'm there nearly every week. I always actually go to murder scene. I actually say hello to Liz. I normally park my car in that street. It's really, again, very emotional. Even now, after all these years, we're talking about, for me, nearly 2.5 decades, for me. Anyway, so at 1:30, so just as Louis Deemschutz was discovering the body of Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes was being released from Bishopsgate Police Station, which is still there. But I told Cocker were the last acknowledged words from Catherine Eddowes, who again, like Elizabeth and Polly and Annie, they were in the 40s. And off she went to the prostitutes' church, which was St. Boltoff's Without. Anything in London with the name Without at the end of it means with outside the city wall. But it was known as the prostitutes' church because it used to serve as the sailors from the docks. Now, he knew he could find a victim, but unfortunately for Catherine Eddowes, she needed to sell a body to get 4 pennies for a doss. She walked smack bang into him. Now, it's 1:30 in Mitre Square. It was P.C. Watkins' patrol. He patrolled the square and left. At about 1:35, 1:36, 3 Jewish men were walking through an alleyway through Mitre Square. They see what they describe as a woman with her back to the wall, the hand on the chest of a man, and the man leaning over her, sort of leaning over. As they walk past, the man leaned down, and I do not know if I would recognise that man again, was the testimony of one of those 3 men, a guy called Joseph Lavender. At 1:45, PC Watkins comes back into Mitre Square and discovers the body of Catherine Eddowes, again laid out in the same way.
So like 10 minutes?
Oh, he had a window of less than 8 minutes to do all this. PC Watkins, minutes. So can you imagine? 1:30, you walk in, nothing, normal, quiet. 15 minutes later, there's a woman that's been disemboweled, and nobody around. That sort of, my goodness, how?
And what was the what was done to her? Sorry, I cut in before we went to that, but what was done to her?
Don't worry. So I think he really let loose on Catherine, and this was the murder scene where the shawl was. I'll just tell you, you're more than welcome to have a look online, but he cut her eyelids off, he cut her ear off, he cut her nose off, 2 inverted V's on her cheeks, sliced her lips, cut her throat down to the spinal cord. He ripped her open. He threw her intestines over her left shoulder. He cut out her kidney, and he cut out her uterus. And he pulled out her breasts and placed them between her feet. And he took the kidney just with him.
He took the kidney this time, not the uterus.
No, he took both.
He took both.
Yeah.
That is absolutely disturbing, especially, and within that short amount of time, you're talking 8 minutes. Like the precision that this person needs as well is mind-boggling.
I'm going to give you something unique now that I don't really discuss on many interviews. So I know that the family were master tailors, and I know that there's a letter that's been we've proven because we've done the scientific analysis, knowing that he attacked a woman with scissors. So we'll get onto the Guzman Street graffiti with chalk in a sec. But think of if the word I'll use here is fussiness. So imagine he's only got minuscule amounts of time. So he would have to slice an eyelid off, slice a thing, slice to very fussy with a 6-inch blade, which is called a Liston knife. Very fussy. With a pair of scissors, he could go snap, 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 and do it so much quicker. So I think that he did the facial disfiguration of Catherine with scissors. Makes more sense. It's how quick he could have done it. You see, a lot quicker. Slight. Imagine a very sharp. It's cut her nose off, which is what he did. When you go online to have a look at the picture, horrendous. Now, all day today and yesterday, I've spoken to, I don't know, 18, 19 of her descendants, the family, because we're doing something very big right now. And it's hard to think that she was just a normal person, down on her luck. It is a tragic tale for Catherine. But when you see the mortuary photograph and her face, it's not just the fact that she was butchered, but I can't put into the dismal tone of that look on her face. It's awful. So he waited for 5 weeks, which obviously believe it or not, the man sitting in front of you is the guy that worked out why he waited for 5 weeks. And then on the 8th of November, 1888, he went out and he murdered Mary Jane Kelly, who was in her mid-20s, different from the other 4. But the reason why she was a victim is she had her own room at 13 Miller's Court. So on the night of the 8th of November, 1888, Mary Kelly was seen in the worst street. She used to live in the worst streets of London, Dorset Street, and Miller's Court was in Dorset Street. She was seen drinking in the Horn of Plenty at the bottom. She was seen drinking at the Britannia or the Ringers at the top end of Dorset Street, and of course the 10 Bells. A little before midnight, she was seen going back to her room drunk, with a man described as having a carroty moustache and a blotchy complexion, so an auburn redhead guy. He was carrying some ale with him, and Mary Kelly was heard singing "Only a Violet I Plucked from Mother's Grave." Just after 3 in the morning, the woman that lived in the room above, number 20, called Elizabeth Prater, heard a faint cry of murder. Now, the morning of the 9th of November, every this Saturday of November, it was the Lord Mayor's show. It's on every year. I went this year, coincidentally on a Saturday. Now, John McCarthy was Mary Kelly's landlord, and Mary Kelly owed about 25 shillings in back rent. And then you're thinking, well, Polly was kicked out for 4 pennies. Annie Chapman was kicked out for 4 pennies. Elizabeth Stride didn't worry about the money. She was just murdered, but not because she had no money. And Catherine Eddowes was murdered because she needed 4 pennies. We get to the 5th victim. She had 25 shillings. That's a fortune. That's an absolute fortune over a pound. Back then, a pound. I doubt they ever saw a pound, Anyway, so John McCarthy, they knew that, John McCarthy, they knew that Mary Kelly had been seen out that night. So he sent his assistant, Thomas Bowyer, who's an ex-police soldier, to go and get some back rent from Mary Kelly. He knocked on the door of 13 Miller's Court, which was locked from the inside, no answer. And round the corner, there was a 4-window panes, like a sash window, as we call in the UK. And one of those window panes was broken and stuffed with an old coat. So Thomas Bowyer put his hand in and pulled that and the curtain back to reveal the worst atrocity ever committed that I've ever seen. When you look at Jeffrey Dahmer's victims and what he did, the way he posed his victims, Mary Jane Kelly was really, obviously Dennis Rader, BTK, awful crime pictures, awful. But still, for me, Mary Jane Kelly's one of the first ever crime scene photographs ever taken in history. Still, to this day, if anybody watches it, goes to have a look, you can't escape the fact that this was a very sadistic and very ill man that bitterly hated women. And this picture really should transform people's thinking of Jack the Ripper, how sensational, Victorian foggy nights, to this is what he did to a human being. And what I'll tell you is this. You couldn't recognise her face. He completely cut her face off. Her partner, Joseph Barnes, only recognised her from an eyeball and an earlobe.
That is absolutely disturbing.
He cut there was nothing left of the body, so just the rib cage. He took out her intestines and placed it around the room. The flesh on her thigh, he cut the entire, so it's down to the bone. He put the flesh on the side table. He tucked her arm into her abdominal cavity. You can see the hack of a forearm and a bicep. There's nothing left between her legs. And he placed her liver between her feet. When the police finally got in there, Thomas Bowyer, just imagine what that man, he must have lived every day, that sight. They said it was as hot as hell, and he had a good 2 hours to do whatever he wanted to her, and he did.
This seems like he had the most time with his victim out of all the other victims, and
right.
It was like a feverish, fantasy almost of his, like a absolutely disturbing. No words to describe that, but wow. Okay.
So then he disappeared, and I recall the first time I saw the JFK story. He goes over to Texas. He's loved. He's welcomed. Ticker tape parade, the lot. Then, before you know it, he's shot. He's going back on the plane. Even his wife's still covered in the body matter in those clothes. Well, I think they're swearing in Lyndon Johnson, and she's still standing there with John F. Kennedy, and then he's gone. And all of a sudden, the murderer's found. It's Lee Harvey Oswald, shot dead. End of story. All closed. This feels that type of story. He comes, he does all of this every 10 weeks and then just vanishes. And people go, what happened? So I think that enigma, that sort of who done it, how did it happen thing, that's linked. There's a similarity I've always found. Parallel. Not an exact parallel, but a parallel. So then that spawns the conspiracy theories. What actually happened was, and I know this as a fact, and this was told to me by Scotland Yard, that shortly after the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, he tried to kill his own sister. The two brothers knew, his brothers Wolf and Isaac knew it was him. They gave him up to the police, and the police, with great difficulty, so what I'm telling you is what Scotland Yard told me. So they told me he was taken out of London with great difficulty to a seaside home, a police retirement home in Brighton, is the best way I can put it. It's near Brighton, and it's called Clarendon Villas. He was placed in a room, and he was identified with an unhesitating ID by Israel Swartz. Israel Swartz was shown into the room, presented with the man or confronted, and he said, "That's the man I saw attacking Elizabeth Stride shortly before she was discovered with a throat cut." But Israel Swartz wouldn't testify. So they had their man, but because the identification process was a confrontation, that was considered a weak ID, and it wouldn't stand up in a court of law. So they were stuck. What could they do? Now, what Scotland Yard told me was, if it was in France, they could have certified him insane there and then and locked him up. What they actually had to do was give him back to his brother under house arrest with two CID officers, Cox and Sagar, they were called, under watch. This is about March 1889. They then put him into, again, this is not documented in the way that's conventional, but he was in a workhouse, where they then moved him to Stepney Workhouse. They then moved him to, in 1891, to Colney Hatch Asylum, where he was suffering on his asylum.
Sorry to interrupt you, Russ, but what is a workhouse?
Okay, so a workhouse is when you're really with the poor. When we're talking about poor and destitute, you would go to a workhouse where you would work for your keep. The best way to put it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
What they used to do is separate the children from the parents to stop the dependency on the usage of these things. With the kids, they would shave the heads to stop about the lice, put them in a uniform, just completely. It's to take away their identity is the best way I can put it.
Yeah, I was about to say, to isolate them, almost isolate them from society. I would say, to push them out. To you could easily tell that they were of this,
and it wasn't a pleasant place to stay. So again, I doubt they let him loose a lot, but they didn't know what to do because this was so big. Anyway, when it calmed down, they put him into Colney Hatch Asylum, and on his admission record, it said mania. Now it says auditory hallucinations and solitary vices. I'll just use the word as it is, so excuse me. Public masturbation, so he used to flash, it was just common for schizophrenia. So that's what he was suffering with, and he was definitely suffering with it at the time of the murders. So schizophrenic, and his occupation was barber surgeon. So he had anatomical knowledge. He would have had to.
Oh, there we go. That really ties into everything. With this anatomical knowledge. Barber, you said barber surgeon.
The hairdresser and barber surgeons back then performed minor surgical operations.
Really?
Would you believe trainee dentists, would travel with the circus, where they would pull your tooth at the circus?
Bizarre, absolutely bizarre. Completely gone from what we know now these days. So dentists would be traveling with the circus, and your barber could do minor surgeries as well. Wow,
training.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they had anatomical knowledge.
Oh, exactly right, and he would have definitely, the way the position that the kidney and the uterus was taken from Catherine Eddowes, he knew what he was looking for, and knew how to find it. And so we get to the mystery of the fact of he was placed in Colney Hatch. He was 23 when he committed these murders.
Only 23.
Only
Wow. I assume this, I've always thought Jack the Ripper was at least in his 30s, in late 30s, but a young person. Wow. Okay.
You find serial killers, I think it's early 20s, mid 30s, they finish. It's time, the rage and anger. And Gary Ridgway was older when he got caught, the Green River Killer. But he couldn't stop. Let's face it, 46 victims, wasn't he? Same with John Wayne Gacy. So you're looking at a young man, relatively young now, just got out of university, just got out of college, committing these violent crimes in an area where the police really didn't know how to deal with this. The first time this has happened, the police didn't know. So then they moved him after 3 years to Leavesden Asylum, which ironically is round the corner from Harry Potter Studios. So literally where the Jack the Ripper ended his days was about 5 minutes away from where Harry Potter was made.
Crazy.
Crazy, exactly crazy. And Dan Green, age 54, on the 24th of March 1919.
And sorry, how did he pass away? Gangrene, you said?
Gangrene, yeah, so, sort of just decay. Yeah, decay.
Yeah.
He died.
I find that a little maybe fitting for him in a way to die. It's,
Yeah. It's odd that they never hanged him, but again, I think the fact that the police knew. So how we knew is Robert Anderson, the head of CID, the head of this case, in his memoirs in 1910 called The Lighter Side of My Official Life, he admits openly they knew who wrote the Ripper letter, the boss letter given the name Jack the Ripper, and they knew the identity of Jack the Ripper, and that's for everybody to see. His second in command, a guy called Donald Sutherland Swanson, every paper of the case went through that man's hands. He had the best knowledge of this case. In his copy of the memoirs of Robert Anderson, he writes about the fact that the identification went wrong, the problem with the seaside home, he had to go back with his brother's house in Whitechapel. But then he also puts Kosminski was the suspect. So it was always known. So then you get to
Wow. Sorry. I had my mic muted there. I was like, really? Yes. Now, before we go too far, well, I don't know if we should go into this if we have the time to, but who were the other potential suspects that were on the table prior to Kosminski?
There were only two. So
okay.
Let's do something very straight here. All of these people that come out of the woodwork were never suspects. There were only ever 3 named Ripper suspects. Everything else is pure fantasy. And it's interesting when, the working knowledge I've got on this is more primary research for 25 years. So if we say the artist Walter Sickert was in France for most of the time of the murders. Prince Albert Victor at not one point was in London. William Gull had 2 strokes and in his 70s. He certainly couldn't be running around Whitechapel in his condition. And he's the one chosen most for the Ripper suspect if you watch the films.
Okay. Yeah. And especially having that I think it was the third murder, or the one lady that had it was the 8 minutes. She had 8 minutes to perform that murder. It you have to be pretty healthy to be able to do something like that.
Absolutely, and be able to quick on your feet and scarper in his 70s. So that's where they get the Thomas Netley carriage. But there's I was standing there today. I was there 2 days ago, and I was there on Friday. You can't get through there without making a noise. And if a carriage had gone past PC Watkins, which it would have done, he would have been able to trace it and track it down. That was all nonsense. So the 3 suspects only ever named in what's called the Macnaghten Memorandum, written in February 1891, were Montague John Druitt. He was a former barrister teaching at an all-boys school, and around about the November time, he got the sack. And it wasn't just the sack; it was intimated that he was fiddling with the pupils, the boy pupils. So you can understand why he basically drowned himself. He jumped in the Thames and drowned.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
December. So because he was found dead and there were no more Ripper murders, the assumption was, he could have been the Ripper because he was just dead, and that's why they stopped. Michael Ostrog is the only full other named suspect. Now, Michael Ostrog was around 50. He did come from Poland, and he did come from the village very near to where Kosminski grew up. But Michael Ostrog was actually incarcerated in an asylum at the time of the murders. So it's curious that he was named.
So that's it. He's out. Yeah.
So then we get Kosminski, not the full name, just Kosminski. And in his, the words are strong homicidal tendencies, bitter hatred for women, strong suspect. So basically, he's telling you who it was without telling you, if you see what I mean.
Exactly. Did they ever state? Did we ever go into detail as to why he had this hatred for women?
Well, that's an interest. So here we go. I know from my friend who used to run Leavesden Asylum, the marshal, what was left of Leavesden Asylum. And it turned out, after all these years, that it looked very strongly like his mother used to sexually abuse him.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. That might be the answer as to why, why he has this hatred. Yes.
So when you look at the murders, the question is, did he build his way up through victims of prostitutes? Then he attacked his sister. Was he working his way up to kill his own mother?
Good point. Good point. And maybe that ties in with the pulling out of the uterus as well. Because that's about giving birth and about being a mother. That that is part of being the mother, and it's this resentment towards his mother, and
You're,
it's like the control.
you're taking what makes a woman in a way,
Yeah. Yeah.
physically.
Exactly.
Now, as I said, I'll come on to something later. I'll bring that up now. So it wasn't until somebody from Codega, a wonderful lady, gave me the fully researched family tree of Kosminski. So for over nearly 180 years, I've got the complete family tree of every single family member, who they were, where they came from, what they did. Even why the name Kosminski is the name Kosminski, because it's the town Kosmin. That's where it comes from. And I gave that. So obviously I know, well, say not obviously, I know descendants of his family. So I gave that to her about 2 years ago. And she was so overjoyed, she gave me all the family photographs. And in there is his oldest brother, Isaac, in his Masonic robes being inaugurated.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yes, yeah. Well, considering I always thought, is there a Masonic league? But I didn't realise. And there he is, the brother sitting in the Lodge of Israel, which is the family where the brothers were Masons. So they were Freemasons, not made up, record. And I've actually got the photographs and the records of them actually going into the Masons as well. So that brings on the ritual, the murders. So at 3 o'clock in the morning of the 30th, the night of the double event, a police constable, Alfred Long, shone a bullseye lamp in what's called Gulson Street in a little doorway. And he saw chalk handwriting on the wall with a piece of bloodied apron from Catherine Eddowes underneath. So he knew that the murder had been there. And the chalk handwriting said, "The Jewess," spelt with a Jew, "are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." And many people over the years have tried to fathom this out. And about 5:30 in the morning, Charles Warren, the police commissioner, came down to view it and had it washed off. That was so controversial that he had to resign 5 weeks later. The Jewess are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. Well, that was erased because it was a Jewish area and they thought it would be conceived as anti-Semitic. But because I realised that I'd seen with my own two eyes that the family were Masons, the word Jewish has nothing to do with Jews. It has everything to do with the 3 assassins that murdered the Grand Master Mason. When you become a Mason, there's a thing called the blood oaths. And those oaths describe what Kosminski did to the victims: cut the throat, throw the intestines out, take my body parts and burn them. So the body parts, so you're sort of sitting here with this story of what the reality of this really was. So he took the body parts as part of that ritual, which is a very strict ritual, so we could burn them, which is exactly what the blood oaths and the word Jewish is the giveaway key to that story. So the question is, you're going out to commit murder. Why would you have chalk with you?
Exactly.
Now, so we look at what type of occupation uses chalk.
I have no idea. Well, a teacher, I would think a teacher of sorts.
Yeah. But also a tailor. Tailor's chalk. And of course, the family, the brothers were master tailors.
Yes, you were saying that. Yes, yeah.
So you would have had a piece of chalk on him most likely anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did they by chance take a picture of that writing on the wall?
No, it was washed off before they did. But thankfully it was recorded by the policemen that were there at the time.
Yeah. But still, even a photo of that would have been, yeah.
Yeah. There's a picture of the documents that was written, but no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Now, go ahead, sorry.
All I was going to say is this blown out of proportion serial killer monster story of a schizophrenic Jewish man that lived right in the area at the time, murdered these women over 10 weeks, tried to kill his sister, was arrested, then put away in asylum, is the story. The press, and of course, everybody's who'd done it, fantasy and I would say macabre interest in this story, has given you the legend of Jack the Ripper, which exists today, when in fact I've told you the story.
Exactly. And it's really, really interesting. And, I when you were talking about that, where the intestines were always thrown over the left shoulder, like, I was like, there has to be something with that. And by you saying like this blood oath that there was a tie-in with that kind of ties in with it. So these were ritualistic, but also deranged psychotic who was, working his way up to his mother. But there was almost like a purpose of sorts to this ritualistic blood oath, but also, you know, the serial killer who has lost his mind and he is, attacking women. It was almost like two separate ideas merged in together into one.
Yeah.
Now, how did you get to discovering that this was Kosminski? Like, where did that start then?
So when the shawl came off the sale, which believe it or not is 18 years ago in March.
Okay, and the shawl was from was that Elizabeth Stride?
Catherine
No,
Eddowes' fourth murder scene.
Catherine Eddowes. Okay.
So it's called the Eddowes Shawl. And Mum that called me, it was all over the press. And I had to find a reason to go and look and see if I wanted to buy it. And the connection of the pattern of Michaelmas daisies, the Michaelmas, the 29th of September, 8th of November celebration. That's when it's celebrated on those two dates, linked three of the murders to those dates. That was enough for me. So that was the clue. So then I called Scotland Yard, told, because the shawl used to be there for 10 years, and they kept it in a filing cabinet, did nothing with it. Go figure. Anyway, when I told Scotland Yard about my discovery, it was then I was told it was Kosminski. And that, like I told you about Robert Anderson, they told me that story. So it was just, okay, so we know who it was. So then it was a case of, well, there is blood on the shore. It's very, very clear. You can clearly see blood on the shore and blood clots as well. And it wasn't for a few years, actually 4 years, did I meet a scientist called Dr. Jari Luhalainen, who's an ancient DNA specialist and a very gifted scientist. I make no bones about this. This man is a genius, in my opinion. So he managed, what he did is identified arterial blood spatter consistent with slashing on the shore and the evidence of split body parts. In fact, we did, on that part there, we did find a kidney cell, and we know that Catherine Eddowes' kidney was taken that night. And also there was semen on the shore. So if he could get uncontaminated DNA from the blood on the shore, then if I could find a descendant, we're on track. So that's exactly what he did. So many people you will find have tried to diffuse this story and say it's not real, we don't believe the science, blah, blah, blah. Well, the family believes me, I know we've got it, Yari knows he's got it. So he managed to get it down to a single cell to avoid contamination. And from that, he amplified, like photocopied exactly the DNA. And that meant that that blood on there was human. So I found a direct female descendant. In fact, that's the lady that's been in the press with me for the last 2 weeks, called Karen Miller. She's the female down. It's a daughter. She gave me a sample of DNA, and after 6 months of very intensive work from Yari, he got 100% match between Karen Miller and the blood that we got on the shore. So we knew the shore was at the murder scene.
So it authenticates it. It's 100% that is,
Thank
the
you.
shawl is there. We know it's there.
Yeah. So the other thing that where people sort of underestimate is I'm not stupid. If this wasn't it, I'd come out and say it wasn't it. You know, it's not as if I need the money. It's just it, but it was. So then we were writing. I was ready to write the book, The Edo Shore. My agent said to me, "You've got to go further because these people have a vested interest in keeping this a mystery." There's a society out there called the Ripperologist Society. They don't want this story solved. It's their baby. They think they own this story. I don't own this story. They don't own this story. This is for the world. Anyway, so he said, you've got to go further, at least date it. So we subjected it to mass spectrometry, which is another scientific technique conducted by a guy called Dr. Fayez Ismail. This is what Fayez said to me. He said the blue section on the shore, which is about 2 foot by about 2 foot, big piece of material. He said, that's water soluble, that dye. If it was in water, it would run. If Catherine Eddowes was out in the rain with that shawl overhead, the blue dye would have run. There's no evidence of that. He said the dye come from St. Petersburg in northern Russia. This is an Eastern European garment. It wasn't made in Spitalfields from the silk weavers. This come from Eastern European, and we know he was Eastern European. And finally, he said it's pure silk. He said an upper middle class family own this. It would have never been owned by a prostitute. And we know that Catherine Eddowes, her and a partner, he had to pawn his boots the day before she was murdered so they could get a night's refuge, a room, if you like, and he was in the Salvation Army refuge. So if it was an expensive garment, she would have sold it. How would she have got it? If it was stolen, it would have been alerted to the police and she would have most definitely been arrested. So all of a sudden, that realization of the shore was at the murder scene, which we'd done through the science, then if it wasn't taken to the murder scene by the victim, the only other person that would have took it there would have been the murderer.
Exactly. You know, and it's yeah, like you said, if her partner had to pawn his boots, you know, they could have pawned the silk scarf and
Oh
you
yeah,
know, gotten some money as well. So you
yeah.
know that leads credence to it's not theirs, like just like you're saying. You know, yeah.
So that realization of, oh my word, the semen on the shore, if it wasn't a customer of Catherine Eddowes and it was taken by the Ripper, who else just the semen could be but only his? So if we could get uncontaminated DNA from that, we've got DNA from Jack the Ripper. So we were back in the labs with a guy called Dr. David Miller, who's a sperm head analyst. We did get uncontaminated DNA and we got cells from there. We got the DNA. I remember that moment when Yari called me. It was about 5:30 in the evening, and he said, "We've cracked it, Russ." I honestly, you know, when you take in these moments of the mammoth realization of what we've got here was beyond my little brain, if you like, to comprehend. Anyway, so I said, "What do we do?" He said, "Well, try and exhume him, because from a skeleton you can get the pulp in a tooth, and we can get his DNA." And this was in 2012. In fact, it was the 12th of December 2012. So that weird date, but that's how it was.
Very weird day.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, we all know what that day was. Yes.
yeah. So I vividly remember. Again, these are moments as I recall. I live, you know, this journey. It's been an adventure like nothing that anybody could imagine, especially me. So we tried to exhume him, and the people, the Jewish, it's called the United Synagogue. They wouldn't let us exhume him under any circumstance. So that we did the very next thing, which is if he had a sister, we get the DNA from her. If we could find a direct female descendant from his sister, we could do it that way. And I did. That took me 10 months. So then 4 months after getting a sample of her DNA, it comes to the third Friday in February 2014, so 10 years ago nearly. And Yari says to me about halfway, go and check your inbox. And there, at that moment, I realised I'd spent upwards of nearly £1 million, and I'd spent 14 years on this. And there was a 100% match with the descendants of Aaron Kosminski, direct female descendants of Aaron Kosminski's sister, and the semen from the shore that we placed at the murder scene on the night of Catherine Eddowes' murder. So that's how.
So irrefutable evidence, irrefutable.
Irrefutable, but everybody has tried to destroy it.
Well, I can understand why they would want to. You know, this has been this mystery that people like yourself. You spent half of your life tracking down this mystery, and if someone's like, "I solved it," well, these other people are like, "Well, when I've lost my purpose, now what?" They want it to continue. They want it to go on, so to speak.
Yeah, but I think if you actually grow up, step back, and realize, it's been solved, then you can actually accept it and move on. And it's those people that refuse to believe the truth, even though it's staring them right in the face. And it's those people I don't have the time of day for whatsoever.
I wouldn't either. I wouldn't either. It's maybe in the beginning, maybe you humored them, but I think after a while, it'd probably be constant attacks that you just like, no, we're done. I'm not going to deal with this anymore.
Yeah, this still is, but we just like, come on now. Now the science was peer reviewed, and even they got bombarded with complaint, all sorts. So they've just covered themselves. But the fact is, the science holds firm. And what I did was, in the next book, The Definitive Reveal, we actually address every single question that was ever raised on the doubts of the story.
Perfect. I think that is fantastic. And that second book, that is out already, or when does it come out?
No, it came out on the 1st of October. So
fantastic.
It's a book, and it's on Amazon US, Amazon UK. You can buy it from me at the jacktherippertour.co.uk, where I sign them for you. Naming Jack the Ripper, The Definitive Reveal, the Masonic connection in there, everything is in there. The one thing I haven't said was when I got all the family photographs, I went to a facial reconstruction expert because, of course, I didn't know what he looked like. No one knows what he looks like. And through the family photographs, you can get virtually, this is the man. So I produced the face of Jack the Ripper as well.
Wow. Fantastic. Yeah, your research, your tireless research has, in my opinion, closed the door on probably the most infamous, or one of the most infamous serial killers, at least of the 1800s, we'll say, or maybe possibly of all time. It's fantastic, so I applaud that, because it's good to have closure. A lot of people, I know some people will be like, oh, just leave it alone, you're gonna even now these days, sometimes people don't want you to investigate anything because you're going to disturb the victims' families. But I think the victims' families need that closure. They need to find that, and
right.
It's very important. It's very important.
That's exactly what we're doing right now. They've had enough of all these made up people. They just want this just put to bed, so they can just know that there's a closure for them. We know it was Kosminski. It's now time for us, because we're trying to get to the High Court now, to the Coroner's Court, to say, you know what, we've got the evidence, here it is. It's irrefutable. Just please put this to bed. The one thing we went to Her Majesty's Coroner, she's now His Majesty's Coroner. She's seen the evidence, and straight away she said, I will support this case.
Fantastic. So you are going to court with this to present it to get it almost kind of tried, or just be like definitive proof that this is the killer, and then we can
be named categorically, because he can't be tried because he's dead, and all witnesses are dead. Everybody's dead. But what we can do is refute all the other names that are thrown into the melting pot, if you like. There's only
fantastic, and I wish you all the luck in that one. And
Thank you.
everybody, I would highly suggest everybody to buy your books. Not only it's a great read, but also to support you on this journey because, like you said, you've invested a lot of money, but also your time as well. This is and I think the world needs to know, not just London, not just the UK, not just Europe, but the whole world. You know, the whole world knows about Jack the Ripper, and if we can put a name to it and close that file, you know,
Yeah,
that we close the door on that one, and then
we can move.
maybe you have another one to track down.
I've solved the second one. I'm under contract not to say, even though people have again had a go at me. But I do have a third one, and it is a big one, and it's an American one, and I found a way in.
Oh wow, an American serial killer that you found the answers to,
Yeah,
but you can't answer that right now, right? Is what you're saying?
I can't. But one day, not another 25 years from now, because I'll be in.
Yeah, something much sooner, something much sooner. And when that happens, I definitely would want you back. Now, Russell, before we bring this to an end, and I want to thank you for your time. Um, what started you on this journey? Actually, this is a question I should have asked at the beginning, but I'm going to ask it at the end. What was the drive to track down this, or to follow this mystery?
Well, I'd been in the East End for 11 years already, and it was when I watched the film From Hell did I realise that I'd been walking in the footsteps of the Ripper for 11 years and not known. That's really where it started. I also had this exceptionally strange feeling of that something's happened here, but I couldn't place it back then. But when I realised it was the Ripper, I thought, whoa, that's it. And believe it or not, there's many, many times I've wanted to walk away from this, and I truly have. And it kept on bringing me back. There's far too many coincidences that can't be ignored. And very, really odd ones. Just even Kosminski's death certificate, when you go to the catalogue where you have to find it, the man above him come from Birkenhead. That's where I'm from. One of the Walter Sickert, he performed in New Brighton at the Floral Pavilion. I've performed on the same stage as Walter Sickert. Frederick Bailey Deeming, another sort of so-called suspect, he married a woman from my hometown.
Oh wow,
When Francis
a
Trump,
lot of coincidences, a lot of synchronicities that I seem to have lined up.
that's just a small tip of the iceberg of them, yeah.
Now, I'm going to ask you one more last question. So, I deal a lot with the paranormal, the supernatural, everything else, the unexplainable, we'll say. Do you feel that your draw to this was maybe some sort of supernatural draw, maybe a reincarnation of one of the police officers or something, there was something drawing you to this, is that ever crossed your mind, anything like that?
It has, yeah. It feels this was destiny for me. There's no two ways. I found lots of coincidences, including the woman that gave us the DNA that we matched with the semen. She's not even from London. She worked in the same road as where her great 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 grandmother lived in 1891. It's weird connections. You think, oh, hang on a minute, and I've noticed there's a lot of those in this story that I've managed to, but I, I just have this eye or this gift for doing this. And be honest with you, I didn't start my life. I was a completely different life before this. So I do believe there's something there. I couldn't tell you what it was though.
Yeah, you were definitely being guided by some other, supernatural detective or something along that line. A tie-in for the past of maybe a reincarnation of one of the detectives who never got to see the closure of this one, and they're guiding you on this. And I'm glad that you have followed that path and gotten some answers. Well, gotten the answer. It is great. And then you said you got two more, so definitely looking forward to hearing from those as well, Russell. But before we close up, tell everybody one last time where they can find you and your tour company as well. Where they can look that up as well.
So I do private tours where you get you experience this story full on. You can contact me through Russell Stephen Edwards. The Stephen is with the PH on Facebook. The Jack the Ripper Experience on Facebook are my two pages. My website's the Jack the Ripper tour.co.uk. Make sure it's .co.uk. where a few down, so don't get mixed up with the others, or you won't see me. Many people do that. And the tours are open. I've got some fantastic tour guides now that really do look after this story for me.
Fantastic. And your books are on Amazon, or they can hit you up directly to get a signed copy as well, right?
Naming Jack the Ripper and Naming Jack the Ripper: The Definitive Reveal. Yeah.
Awesome. And you have a graphic novel coming out, a bunch of, you said, how many? 25?
Yeah, 3 are already out. 4th should come out next month. And it's a blow-by-blow full account, as if you're there in the story, right in the middle of it.
Fantastic. I talked to someone recently who dove into the cult of Yerba Buena here in Mexico, and they wrote a graphic novel, a comic about it as well. And it's interesting finding these tie-ins with my previous guests as well. So definitely, all the links will be down below. So everybody who wants to find those books, your tour guides or your graphic novels, all the links will be below. So again, Russell Stephen Edwards, I want to say thank you so much for spending the time with us here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, everyone, that was Russell Stephen Edwards with the definitive proof of who Jack the Ripper was, Kosminski. The path that he went on, and also, the time with the Masonic Lodge is very enlightening as well too. It really ties credence to like these ritualistic tendencies, but also there's this psychotic nature as well, which was ties in with the schizophrenia. And that was and again, like I said, we should not forget the humanity of those people who were sacrificed, murdered, and it's they deserve to be remembered. So like when we're going down, and that goes with just a lot of these stories that I get into, let's never forget the humanity. That's who we are. That's what makes us who we are, is our humanity and our love. So let's remember them. Yes, they were prostitutes, but that doesn't make them any less. They did it out of necessity to pay for the rent, so have a roof over their heads. So with that, everyone, I want to say, keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way home.
Beneath the stars where shadows grow, the Nephilim's echoes whisper low. Bigfoot roams through the forest deep, and Dogman prowls where the brave won't sleep. Across lost history we wonder why, seeking the truth that time tried to hide. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms of stories untold, the Codex flame is the light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms of stories untold, the Codex flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. legends rise from the Earth's deep core, a lost legacy we can't ignore. With every step, the veil grows thin, revealing worlds where the strange begins. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come and always find your way back home. Giants, cryptids that call